Welcome, Dr. Hayes. We are so overjoyed to have you with us. I'd like to just briefly walk through a little bit of your background so that those of us who may not be as familiar with you know a little bit of what's to come. So Dr. Hayes is a renowned psychologist of more than 40 years. He serves as an emeritus professor of psychology at the University of Nevada and president of the Institute for Better Health, a 45-year-old charitable organization which is dedicated to better mental and behavioral health. He is also an author of 47 books and nearly 700 published scientific articles. He's featured on TEDx and in publications such as Psychology Today, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, and Time Magazine. He is one of the most cited psychologists in our shared world, and he continues to innovate the psychological arena. Dr. Hayes is the founder of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, Relational Frame Theory, and co-developer of process-based therapy. He has dedicated his career in research and practice of bringing ease to suffering and empowerment of life to us humans. His work has been celebrated with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies and the Impact of Science on Application Award from the Society for the Advancement of Behavior Analysis. For me personally, Dr. Hayes, I first heard of you literally in a 2016 podcast interview called The One You Feed. And from that moment, I was hooked. I re-listened and took notes and re-listened and took more notes. And I also listened to episodes that you had with Dr. Susan David, another professional that I admire. And it's always been profound to hear you speak. We are honored and grateful to have you take the time with us to be here today. So thank you very much. I will turn the floor over to you, as I think you have prepared something to discuss with us today. You're muted. Let's see if I can.
Thank you for that introduction. I've solved that other problem. Although you may want me to click on it later, for reasons that'll become evident if I wander around, make ugly faces. I'm here without PowerPoints deliberately because I thought, given the spirit of these kinds of groups, that and of just the community that I sense you've been able to build, it seemed more genuine and authentic to do it that way. Let me just say a little bit about my personal connection to the issue of addiction, just to get in the room. For the longest time, I said, kind of oddly, that I didn't really know why I worked in the area. And I gradually moved up these kind of academic ladders. In terms of the addictions, for example, the National Institute of Health here in the United States deals with addiction issues through AAA and NIDA, National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Drug Abuse, those two institutes. And I ended up on the committee that decides whether or not people can actually get grants at NIDA, which is pretty highfalutin. I was proud of it. It was some years ago, but the secretary of HHS in the US of A has to appoint you, Donna Shala at the time. And there I am among all these folks deciding where $1 billion is going to go. And still wondering, why am I here? And the only answer I could give at the time was I had a student who became very close to me and was an author on the first acceptance and commitment therapy or acceptance and commitment training, either way, ACT. In either case, we don't say ACT, we say ACT. To me, ACT sounds like ECT, and I'm old enough to remember how it was to sit on those electroconvulsive therapy sessions. It's not an attractive memory, but and Kelly is a person in recovery. He's written pretty cool books that I will mention. The Wisdom to Know the Difference, that's his book. There's others talking about the relationship between the kind of work that we're doing over in ACT and the work that's done in 12-step. But there I am among all these professionals thinking, kind of like, why am I here? And one day it sort of hit me like a a brick upside the head. Why do you keep saying that? Your father was an alcoholic. You were in Alateens as a teenager. You've got family members very close to you who struggled with addiction. And you're wondering why it matters to you? I mean, it was one of those moments where say, of course, this is of deep personal relevance. There is a reason why I've done all this work on various kinds of things: chronic pain and opiates, smoking, alcohol addiction, opiate, heroin addiction, on it goes. But it's one of many things I've been focused on in truth. I've never really picked a particular population to focus on for reasons that will become evident. My journey as a psychologist has been more trying to, you might say, kind of cutesy way to say it, hack the human mind. I wanted to figure out why it is that we suffer so. And if you take that question seriously, you really have a hard time answering it. You know, every creature outside the buildings you're in, or if you're out in nature, it looks like some of you either have a background that says you're actually there. Look around with some care and you probably can see other creatures moving around. And all of those creatures would be as happy as they knew how to be if they had even a quarter of what you've got. You're not very, very likely. I'm talking to almost nobody who's worried about whether or not they'll eat tomorrow. I'm probably talking to almost nobody who's wondering whether or not you're going to freeze tomorrow, or whether an animal is going to attack you. And these basic issues, I mean, for goodness sakes, look what we're doing right now. I'm thousands of miles away from many of you, and we're talking in real time. I mean, what kind of privileged creatures are we that we can communicate with almost anyone in the world within minutes? That we can, you know, have the resources to be able to say what I just said. You're not going to worry about food and shelter. Look around you. The rest of creation isn't like that. And yet we're the ones, the only ones, that leave the planet voluntarily by our own hands. And at rates that are staggering. And not just people who've lived a tough life and are facing pain and they have illness and play the violin. No, I'm talking about, for example, preteen adolescents. That's 10 to 12 years old. Suicide rates have gone up something like 300% in the last 4 years. Don't be telling me this is just raising a bunch of whiners or teaching people to complain. We're talking about dead people. So something's odd about human beings. When I wrote my first self-help book called Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life, it was my 5 minutes of fame. It got written up in Time magazine by kind of a fluke, the late John Cloud, who was killed by his addiction. Actually, a wonderful man, and became a close friend, a wonderful author, writer. Saw something pass his desk, a little thing said, "Happiness is not normal." I'd never written those words, but somebody said it about me, some marketer, when I'd written this book called Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life. And he swooped in and followed me for a year, just like a puppy almost. I couldn't give a workshop without John being there. And in that book that enchanted him so, for reasons that had to do with his suffering, maybe I'll mention just a bit. There's another example of why I'm so interested in addiction, even though I have such broad interests. But the first sentence of that book says, "The single most remarkable fact of human existence is how hard it is to be happy." So we're the suffering creatures amidst plenty. And that cannot be explained unless you believe, as I do, that something has happened in the evolution of the human species that has created a conflict. And I think I know what it is, or at least I know a chunk of what it is, and it's not so innovative. Other people have said it, but we've done a deeper dive. And so the arc of my work as a psychologist was to take that question seriously for a reason that I'll mention in a minute. And then to try to develop the smallest set of ideas about what we do, not what we have, what category we're in, or what labels put upon us. We're all living inside these freaking labels for the last 150 years. You have this, you have that, you have this, you have that. And you notice that things aren't getting better. They're not. They're getting worse. And part of that is why, I believe, maybe I'll even talk a bit about that we've had a 150-year-long journey into top-down categorical concepts being put atop people as if it predicts their future, and it doesn't. It's a lie. It's a statistical lie. It's a conceptual lie, and it's part of why I think our children are suffering so much. When even 9-year-olds can say, I have this and I have that, and I'm 4th percentile, or I'm 95th percentile, and this or that, or this or that. But I wanted to figure out what is the smallest set of things that do the most good in the most areas for human beings. Can I hack the human mind to the point where I can get this thing down to something you could count on your fingers? And that's what I want to present to you today. And the core of it is called the psychological flexibility model. It's what's in that earliest self-help book. But it's expanded as we've taken it, done a deeper and deeper dive in it. And some of the expansion I have not even written about in self-help work. My next big trade book was called A Liberated Mind. That was 2019. It's not even in there, some of the expansions that we're now working on. And so what is that smallest set of processes, negative and positive, that do the most in helping us to understand human functioning in the most areas? I can say it in a sentence, or at least I can say it without taking the next breath. If you want to do well, you're going to have to learn how to be more emotionally and cognitively open and make use of these important feelings, sensations, memories, emotions, thoughts that we have, and still come into the present moment in a flexible, fluid, and voluntary way from a more spiritual, noticing sense of self. And when you're able to open up to your own history and show up in the present to turn your attention towards what brings meaning and purpose into your life and create habits around that, remembering to extend those processes into your social relationships and taking care of your body. Period. The end. Thank you very much. I can now take questions. No, I'm not. I'm teasing. I need to explain those things. But before I explain those things, and maybe a little bit about the intellectual journey that led to that paragraph, and the data, I don't have any slides, so I can only just make claims. But before I even do that, I want to say this. There is a way that scientists figure out whether that processes, and processes just comes from a Latin word that means a parade or a procession. We even say procession, processes, same thing. I just mean the things that you can actually do that move you in a direction. And that little paragraph I just said has 6 processes and then 2 levels to which we apply processes. The way that scientists figure out that processes are important, at least traditionally, is they do a thing called mediational analysis. You don't want me to explain it, and you don't want to know the statistics. Just there's a word, and it's called mediation, and everybody agrees that's the best way to know that you know something about how change happened and not just what you did to make change happen. So you know what your techniques are, that's what you did. You know the outcomes, that's the evidence of change from where you started and where you ended up. But how did that happen? The why question, that's what I've been most interested in my career. And that's what's in that long paragraph. Well, the way that we figure that out typically in randomized controlled trials, I'll say some geek words here, which is the gold standard for how you know that something works. I have issues with that, but that's the gold standard. When you want to answer the why question, you do this thing called mediational analysis. So my colleagues and I decided we're going to look at every single mediational study ever done in the history of the world by anything that changes a mental health outcome, including anything in the addictions, that was done properly, analyzed properly. You know, it's solid. We know that. That's really, for that one study, you knew why it happened. You knew what the pathway was, not just that you did this and you got that, but how did the pathway happen? Which, as I say now for the third time, is what I focused my career on. So we decided to look at everything, every single form of psychological intervention, including 12-step, by the way, every single study ever done in the history of the world, in any language, any journal, anywhere. That sounded better than it lived, because it meant 50 people working for 3 years to answer that question, 55,000 studies that had to each be read twice. As they say on commercials, do not do this at home. Forget about it. We called it Death Star, the Death Star study, because it was gigantic, took forever to build. It looked like unworldly in outer space. We thought we finally got it done, it would blow up the world. And we'll see, because we only published it a year ago. But I can sit here now and tell you what we know as scientists, as behavioral scientists, including everything we know about the addictions in terms of why, what are the processes of change. And I just told you what they were. What I just told you, yeah, that's the core of ACT. But if you expand it out a little bit, and we've learned how to expand it, that's why some of the stuff is not even in my self-help books yet, because I don't want to just be about ACT. I don't give a damn about ACT. What I care about are putting processes into people's lives that uplift them and empower them. I think we know what basically what those are. There's more, of course. There's no one final answer to everything. And everything we know in science is wrong. I mean, there's nothing that's in science that has eventually been proved to be wrong in some way. We just don't know where yet. But it's one of the most progressive institutions ever created by human beings. That's also demonstrably true. In behavioral health and mental health, not so much. We're the poor boy on the list, and sometimes scientists don't even want to include us because we're so slow. But these processes are learning to be more emotionally and cognitively open, to come into the present moment in a flexible, fluid, and voluntary way from a sense of self that is not bound up by your stories and your narratives, but is there when you first open your eyes and mama's eyes met yours, and you dump natural endorphins at the joy of being seen by kind eyes, this witnessing, noticing, more spiritual, deeper sense of self, applied to habits and to what you most deeply care about, including in your relationships and taking care of your body. That's everything. That's it. Now, there's different words, there's 1,000 different words, and that's fine. I'm not a word police. I don't care. You know, if you want to call it one thing or another, it's all fine. And, you know, and there's a lot of wisdom in the big book, by the way. Almost all these processes are in there. If you haven't realized there's a little bit of resonance with what I'm saying, just go look and you'll see. Well, so given that we've looked at all the studies, and in fact, when you properly answer a why question, it ends up in that domain I just talked about. Maybe that gives you a little street cred that what I'm about to say over the next, oh boy, at this rate, 5 hours, over the next 40 minutes or whatever it is worth your attention. I mean, if I can say a paragraph and say that's everything you need to learn to be able to make progress in your life, and we did a really careful scholarly look, and not, by the way, just by ACTI people, the 3 people who worked hard on this, other than our students and colleagues, a couple of them included Stefan Hoffman, who's a winner of the Beck Award, you know, monster of cognitive behavior therapy, and Joe Sorochi, who's a monster of positive psychology and of emotional intelligence. So it wasn't a rigged game. We assembled labs that had a lot of diversity and did it with clean hands. Well, let me walk through those things. We'll start out with psychological flexibility, and then we're going to have to say, remember, you're a social being, so your relationships matter. And remember, you have a body, and if you don't care of that, everything goes to hell anyway. So those two we'll get to. But let's start with the 6 processes that are just at that psychological level. And it's not, I'm not pulling people into pieces. I'm just saying each level is worth attention. And the psychological level is the whole person with a history showing up in a circumstance. That's the psychological level. But then you have parts inside you. You got hearts and brains and, immune systems and all of them, genes and epigenes and all that. And you're part of larger groups that are bigger than, I mean, you're literally a life form that connects socially. I mean, who you are in a group and which groups you're part of and the culture you're part of is all also important. So you're nested in different levels, biophysiological, psychological, socio and cultural. But I'll just talk about the psychological level at this point before extending it to those other levels, because I'm a freaking psychologist. And that's the way knowledge development is organized. It's actually not the best way to organize it, but it's what we live with. Well, there's only 6 things: emotional openness, cognitive openness, attentional flexibility, sense of self, values, committed action, or creating habits. Slightly different words. I'm getting a little more acty in the words. Well, it's 6 things, but really it's only 3 things, because emotional cognitive openness includes openness to your memories, your bodily sensations, etc. But you can just call it openness to all those things, the world within. And that flexible, fluid, voluntary attention from this witnessing or noticing sense of self, well, that's really just awareness. You got to have a creature that's aware, and you got to be aware of something. So that's just me, the person behind your eyes, aware of what's present inside and out, right here, right now, including thoughts about the past and thoughts about the future. I'm not saying the past and future aren't worth attention, but they're not here. Past and future is not here. That's in the big book, by the way. So that's awareness. And then if you had those 2 things, well, there's words for that. People call it mindfulness. I've kind of avoided the M word. I'm a child of the 60s, and I know that the Buddhists hated the Hindus, hated the Christians, hated the Jews, hated the, oh, please. And they've all got methods, whether it's silence or repeated prayer or chanting or contemplative practices of all kinds. I mean, I went to Loyola Marymount. The Ignatian way is a contemplative practice. It's a mindfulness practice, if you want to use the M word. Don't be telling me it's all Buddhism. I avoid the word mindfulness because people immediately go to the guy who was underneath the tree, but the Hindus were doing it 1,000 years earlier. So even that's grabby. So let's not get grabby. Let's just say human beings have known and all of our wisdom traditions, all of our spiritual traditions have known that you have to rein in the chatterbox between your ears, especially as it gets judgy as applied to you. You have to find a sense of self that's beyond your prideful stories or your loathsome, I'm the worst of the worst stories, into something that's more spiritual. In other words, that doesn't have easy edges of concepts and things being applied to you like a thing. No, there's a part of you that's boundless. And from there, to be able to take on your history and the wisdom it contains, you push away your history, you push away your capacity for wisdom. Where do you think you're going to get it? The only place you're going to get it is your history. Well, guess what? There's all kinds of painful things in your history. Horrible things have happened to you. And by the way, you've done horrible things. It ain't just happened to you. It's due to you. If anybody in here saying, no, that doesn't apply to me, I'm going to call you a liar. So how are we going to do that and take that, well, that mindfulness, whatever, more spiritual wisdom, whatever, every religious and wisdom tradition contains it. But then once you do all that, so now we've done open, really we call it 2 things, but it's really one. Aware, we call it 2 things, but it's really one. What are you going to do with your life? Well, I don't know. What do you care about? if you mean, what are you going to do for like, oh, I'm going to build this castle and I'm going to get this degree and I'm going to make $1 million, dude, a train might hit you tomorrow. But you can do with your life right here, right now, in this moment, something that makes your life about something. You can take on the risk of caring on purpose. I want to be about this. Boy, do you feel vulnerable when you do that. Why? Because you hurt where you care. Why did it hurt so much to be betrayed? And you've all been betrayed. Why does it penetrate you so hard to know that you've hurt others, you've betrayed others? In your addiction, very likely. But not just there. Not just there. Don't be blaming just the bottle or just the pill. No, that's another lie, isn't it? Why does that hurt so much? Because you want something. Not the grabby, I want these goals, I want this money, I want this fame, I want this. No, not that. You want to be about something. You want to manifest something. How do I know that? Tell me anybody you look up to, any hero that you have in your life. I bet you they stand for something you wish would be reflected in your own. That's why they're your heroes. You don't look up to people, oh, God, that's so wonderful. I want to be like them. They bought a Buick. You know, it just wouldn't enter your head. Your grandma is worthy because she showed some strength somewhere that you wish you had inside you. Yeah. So open, aware, and then that final one, actively engaged in a life worth living. It doesn't matter to know what you want to be about if you can't put one foot in front of the other. Now, it doesn't have to be big strides. It can be one foot in front of the other by the tiniest millimeter. You're still headed in that direction. You could shuffle your feet so tiny that nobody even knows you're moving. But if you know you're moving, you're moving. And even in the darkest night of the soul, when this chatterbox between your ears is telling you that you're so worthless, you're so unlovable, your life's such a pile of shit that you should just, check out involuntarily, check out through violence, or grab that bottle and disappear that way, or whatever. Those little shuffles give you a little place to stand where my life is about something. Sue me if you don't like it. I know it's not going fast enough. I'll do better tomorrow. And if I don't, I'll do the better the next day after. One day at a time. That's in the big book, isn't it? So that's 1, 2. So open, aware, and actively engaged in a life worth living. So I had 6, I'm now down to 3. Except here's the truth. It's really 1. It's 6 that are 3 that are 1. I was raised as a Catholic. We understand these things. But, here's the way, empirically, we know that. Think about it this way. You got a box. It has 6 sides. If you rip out a couple of those sides, what happens to the box? You don't have a box anymore. Try to stand on it. You'll see. You just got to, if you ripped them all out, throw them on the ground. If you don't have a box, you just got 6 squares. You put them together in a relationship, and you make sure that that relationship is stable. And even if the box is made out of cardboard, you might be able to stand on it. It has a lot of strength when it's organized in a strong way. So it's 6 aspects of 3 things that are really one thing. It's the box. And the box is the thing you stand on when you've created a greater psychological flexibility in your life. Once you've done that, there's these other levels. How are you going to put that into your relationships? And are you going to take care of your body from that same place. And it happens pretty naturally. Like when you really get in touch with your values and you realize, yeah, in order to, let's say you landed on, I want to be more authentic and loving in my relationships. Well, you better take care of your body. You're not going to be able to do that for very long. So that comes out kind of naturally. And similarly, if you say, you know, I said in my relationships, so I've already extended it, but actually there's a reason for that. When we dig into values, when we dig down to what you really want to be about in the world, I don't care if it's just about creating a beautiful painting or, you know, solving a math problem brilliantly, almost always there's a little social piece, and share it with others. And most of our values are obviously not that. I mean, I want to be loving, I want to be genuine, I want to contribute, I want to be honest. So, you know, they're the very things that we care about are already social. Why? Because we're the social monkeys. We're not monkeys, but you know what I'm saying? We're the social primates. We are the most cooperative, most social primates on the planet by far. Chimpanzees, which 98% of our DNA is shared with them. That's how recent it was that we split off from that branch. You know, they have 100 times more conflict within their groups than we do, 100 times more selfishness and violence than we do. We're the cooperative primates, so much so that that baby, 1 day old, you know, when mama's eyes met yours, you're dumping natural opiates in your brain because, and so does mama, because you've been seen. And you want that smile to happen. Otherwise, why would we take care of these rugrats who poop on the floor? I mean, good God, they're not going to be able to do anything for years. Why do we take care of them? I mean, it's pretty amazing. One of the longest developmental periods in all of the animal kingdom. So mama, the baby, the only other creature, by the way, on the planet that does that is dogs. And they've been hanging out with us for something like 12,000 years. So they've learned to do it too. So you get in front of your dog and, you know, he goes, ah. All right, well, what does this have to do with the diction? Let me walk through these processes and to say what we know empirically and also kind of what maybe in a way that just the tiny littlest thing so that you can kind of get a sense of how acceptance and commitment therapy or training might be useful to you in your recovery journey, or might be worth reading some of these self-help books or hanging out with some of these peer support groups that are out there, or even seeking out a shrink if you wanted to. But you can do a lot just at no cost, easily, just by taking advantage of what's out there. So I'll walk through those 6 flexibility processes in slower motion, mention what we know about the relation to addiction, and then give a tiny little example and see if I can do that in 30 minutes, and then we'll be at question time. Does that seem okay? Thanks for the nodding head. I'm watching you. I'm watching others too. I'm watching you. If you do ugly faces, I'm going to stop, by the way. So, yeah, if you want to control me, that's how you do it. I'll just holla. Will stop me. All right, slow motion. Let's start with cognition. Why? Because that's really what makes it so hard to be human. This thing you and I are doing is you know, Homo sapiens that did it. Maybe the hominids do it. The chimpanzees don't do it. How do we know that? Well, the very, very simplest thing that you can do with a human baby is show it an object, give it a name, and then say the name, and it will look for the object. Its little wobbly head will try to find that thing you named. It needs a few examples, but it's prepared to learn it. If you put a baby in a closet and shove food on the door, and you know, feral children and stuff, this stuff occasionally happens. No, they don't learn that, and if the developmental period goes too long, they'll never be able to learn. There's a window in which you got to learn this weird thing where learn it in one direction, derive it in two. It's not just names. It's other things too. I'll get to that. But it probably started with names, and it started because we're so social. Lots and lots of animals have sounds when things show up. You know, the prairie dog squeaks and when he sees the eagle. And that one that squeaks is more likely to die because the eagle heard it too, right? But so did the rest of the troop, and they're down their hidey holes. And so it's kind of a cooperative thing for the prairie dog squeaker. But when they hear it, a different part of their brain that lights up than seeing the eagle and leads to the squeak, a different part. It's not integrated. Humans, it's integrated, same parts of the brain. They're down the hidey hole because they heard the squeak as kind of an automatic kind of reflex triggered action. That's a communication system, but not like the one we got. And the one we've got, yeah, like other animals on the planet, we have characteristic gestures or sounds or whatever. But when we hear that, we relate it back in the other direction. That's not Pavlov's dogs. You know, bell food, bell food, bell food. You give, Fido a big bowl of Alpo, it doesn't go, what? It doesn't go food bell when it goes bell food, bell food, bell food. It doesn't go backwards. The same thing with instrumental learning, see the little sign that says food here, go find the food. That doesn't mean when you see the food, you go try to find the sign. It doesn't go in both directions. It shouldn't. Why would it? It's because most things in life go in a sequence. Well, those processes, operant and classical conditioning, if you took your Psych 101 class, 500 million years old. How do we know that? Every creature that evolved in the Cambrian, which is 545 million years ago, does it, but not any earlier than that. Sponges don't do it. Slime mold doesn't do it. But spiders and snakes and planaria, and they all do it. But they don't do chapstick. Chapstick. Well, where? They don't do that. And if your baby doesn't do that, your baby will not develop human language. You better run, not walk, to the nearest behavior analyst who knows something about relational frame theory, which is a theory that's underneath ACT, that literally might have a chance to recover that baby and do the kind of training that would train the baby, learn it in 1, derive it in 2. Once you can do that, you can put it in networks that change what you do. There's a ditty. Learn it in 1, derive it in 2, put it in networks that change what you do. That summarizes 40 years of my work on how cognition works. Because I was not just interested in one of the processes that will help us in an applied way. I wanted to know why, even about the why. So we didn't have a good theory of language and cognition. And I spent a lot of my life trying to figure that out. It's called relational frame theory. I've done enough geek already. And at this rate, I'm not going to make my goal. So I'm going to stop talking about it, but I want to make it over, make it real. There's a reason why we call addiction diction. Diction. Dictate. Be spoken to. Following the rules. You've got words in your head that tell you, if I do this, I won't have that. Now, your particular addiction might have started inside a social thing. If I do this, I'll have that. My mates will think I'm cool and we'll have a good party. But some of you also, quite a number, it's not all, realize pretty early on, I feel a hell of a lot better when I'm, 3 sheets to the wind. You realize that there was something soothing in there. And then that little voice said, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. Because you could imagine a universe in which you'd feel better if you just did those things, and it dictated to you. So you got to, and sometimes you can give your reasons. Because you're so unworthy, because you're so unlovable, because you're so shameful, because you're so guilty, because you're so inadequate, because you're so ugly, because you're so stupid, because you're so, it will also dictate, how to get out of that. Yeah. Or get into it. if you were in just for social reasons, because you're so awkward, you'll feel a lot better and you'll be able to be more happy and friendly and people will like you as long as you have just enough lubricant to make that possible. Could be coming in that way. Soon enough, it dictates you in another way, of course, because once you have an addiction, if you start wandering away, it starts screaming. One of the first things we tell people when we're doing ACT with addictions is, and if you do this, you're going to feel worse. You're not going to feel better. You're going to feel worse, of course. Guess what? Because you're going to have to walk out of your freaking addiction. And you have to do it one step at a time, in the same way that you walked into it, one step at a time. So you got hell to pay because your body is going to say no. And some of these things, it just screams, especially if there's alternatives. There's that weird fact, it's easier to go into detox if you're in jail than it is if you're at home. Far, far easier. Yeah, because you got your little mind saying, it's right there. It's in the drawer. Just open the drawer. It's right there. You could go to the store. You could, harder, a lot harder. Even physiologically, because your body's hearing this too. It's listening. It knows what it means when you have options versus you're in jail. You don't have an option. Shit, I guess I'm going to have to do this detox. A lot easier for most people. But anyway, okay, so you're being dictated to. So what do we do in ACT? You don't want the word machine to turn off because it's too damn useful. I don't want to be my little dog Dio. I mean, the freaking coyotes here would eat her in a minute. What we're doing is a result of language. Look at all this technology around you. You look around you right now, you probably can, unless you're outside in nature, there's almost nothing you can see that wasn't produced by the very thing that has made you miserable. That very same tool can also say, if I do this, I'll get that. And let's invent this, or, give us all these technologies. But we're riding a tiger. It's only been a few 100,000 years, and it loops back on us. Started with cooperation. Apple. Earn one, drive it in two. Someone across the ravine might bring me an apple. Woohoo! The troop is doing better. We're cooperating better. We have a bi-directional way of relating. But then it turns back on us and starts judging our own lives. So here's some goofy ass things that we do in ACT. We sing our difficult thoughts. Just try it. Take a difficult thought that's really punchy, got you, and just sing it. Pick the tune you like. Happy birthday if you can't think of anything else. Simplify it down to sing it. We say it in silly voices. We give our mind a name. What does George say about that? My mind is named George. Why would you do something that loony-toony? Because that tiny little crack of noticing that you're thinking creates a space between this witnessing, noticing, more spiritual part of you that has the capacity to say, thank you, mind, very much for the invitation, but I respectfully decline it. I'm going in this direction. I've got this covered. You can't do it sober. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I know you're trying to help me. That's not really very helpful, though. And it's not that you're ridiculing your mind. I always remind people of this one. Imagine yourself as a young child saying the things that are hardest for you to hear inside your head. Just take the time to put yourself as a young kid, because it probably goes back that far anyway, sort of, some version. If you heard yourself at a young age, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, whatever, saying the kind of things you say to that person in the mirror when you brush your teeth, boy, you'd hug that kid and you'd probably say, it's not your fault. It's going to be okay. I love you. In front of the person in the mirror, you say, you piece of shit. What's the matter with you? When did we grow up to deserve cruelty, self-cruelty? When did that happen? So diffusion, we call it. Little techniques to notice your thinking in flight. Do the same thing with your emotions. Not to get it away, but to notice it. Notice, for example, where your emotions are in your body and see if you can say yes to that sensation. See if you can say yes to the emotion. There is not any emotion you can name that isn't in some circumstances really useful to you. If I said you can only say good or bad, and then I say joy, you'll say good. If I say sad, you'll say bad. Yeah, always. I mean, 2 months from now, it'll be a year that I got a call that my brother had gone into the hospital with a tummy ache. And before 24 hours had passed, I was by his side with my hand on him when he took his last breath. My bro, my hero, amazing, ran a freaking Ironman at 75. That's sad to remember it even now. Sad has a place, but your mind's so stupid, it'll say sad bad, anxious bad. It's bullshit. Every emotion has a place. And if you really, really want to run away from that, as the joke goes, you're going to need either a lobotomy or a bottle in front of me. And both of those are not ways to live a valued life. So respectfully decline the invitation of your mind to turn your emotions, sensations, and memories into your own enemy. They are the source of wisdom. Your feelers need to be out to sense I'm headed in the wrong direction. When you turn this way or that and you're going down the street that's going to take you to the bar with your friends that if you walk in there, you're vulnerable, you got to have your feelers out. No, I think I'll go this way instead. If you just go mindless, you can't trust it because you've got processes in you that are flying underneath the radar screen. So when you say no to your own emotions, sensations, and memories, you're saying no to your own source of wisdom, and you're deliberately dumbing yourself down and praying that it'll work. It is not going to work. Stupid is not a good way to live. There isn't any book, any self-help book that says how to be more stupid. Well, okay, so open. Aware. We can allocate our attention. We can broaden it, narrow it, shift, or stay. We can do that. You can right now notice what the sole of your right foot feels like. Without wiggling your toes or doing anything, you can probably even notice whether it's hot or cold or the shape of it. If you really attend, you might even get a little sense of it without wiggling, the shape of it. And there's randomized trials showing that teaching developmentally delayed children with IQs below 80 what I just said in 2-minute long exercises and reduces conflict and impulsive behavior by like 50% out on the schoolyard. Why? Well, because it grounds us. We even say grounding us in consciousness. We say humble. Humble means dirt. It's a Latin word for dirt, humus. So can we ground our experience in our experience and learn to sense what's there in a flexible, fluid, and voluntary way? And that can be done with practice. I mean, listen to your piece of music that you like and just focus on one instrument. Now focus on another one. Now focus on two at the same time. By the way, you have 2 feet. I want you to focus on both of the soles of your feet, both soles, not just one, and not by rapidly shifting. You have to fuzz it a little bit to do it. It's like a beam of a flashlight. You have to expand the beam, and that means fewer lumens at any one place. If you have a flashlight, and I have one, I love flashlights, where you turn a little dial and it goes, you can just try it right now. It takes a little bit of exercise because you're used to see if you can fuzz it a little bit, expand the beam, and by golly, you got 2 feet. And you can feel them both at the same time. Goofy exercise. Why would you do that? Because you want your attention to be flexible, fluid, and voluntary. So when you have that thought that deep down there's something wrong with you, but that bottle over there will be helpful to you, you can notice that thought. Thank you. got this covered, and come back to something else, not to subtract it and make it go away. If you do that, you're in a bad Verizon commercial. Is it gone yet? Is it gone yet? Is it gone yet? And every time the answer is no, because you just looked. If you really try to get rid of urges, good freaking luck. Because it means you have to have a rule that says, I want to get rid of urges, that contains even the word urges, and learn it one, derive it in two. Even the word urges will make you think about the urges, and then the urges are present, not absent, and that's what you're trying to make that happen. It's weird. That's why we're suffering so much. We created this amazing tool that gives us what you and I are doing right now, and it's turned back on us because it doesn't come with a rule book. It doesn't come with a training program. You have to do a face plant into the asphalt before you learn how to ride that bicycle. Some of us. And almost everybody I'm looking at right now, you've done face plants in the asphalt. That's why you're part of this group. Well, I'm developed panic disorder, so I did my own face plant. But then you have to catch that there's a part of you that is able to allocate attention. And you've caught it before. It's old home week, but the mind doesn't understand it, not the analytic judgmental mind, because that part of your mind is very recent and categorizes and judges. We're talking about something that is there at birth, the eyes connecting with mama. And it's built out only a little bit with language, with learning that it isn't just me, it's I, you. It isn't just here, it's here, there. It isn't just now, it's now, then. And when I, here, now kind of comes together, it attaches to this witnessing, noticing, more spiritual sense of self in a way that's really cool, because then you can imagine what it's like to be in the Ukraine right now, what it's like to be in Israel right now, what it will be like to be in Africa if we don't do something about global warming 100 years from now, what your great grandkids might think of Florida when it's underwater, or if we don't do something about stigma and prejudice and all these problems that we're facing in the world forward. So time, place, and person, we can move our consciousness around. We can imagine what it might be like to talk to our great-great-grandkids. Very few of us will see great-great-grandkids. There's a Native American exercise where they believe that you're the extension of your grandkids, of your grandparents, rather, that you're literally almost a manifestation. And they have a contemplative practice of sitting. Some of it's actually like in sweat lodges and stuff like that, with your grandparents and your grandchildren. Try that sometime if you have kids or can imagine having kids. You only have to imagine that, because obviously it's not the real grandkids for most of us, or the real grandparents for most of us. They've passed, or they haven't even arrived yet. Do it. And then think about what you would want to receive and give in terms of wisdom. That's just an example of many ways that you can play around with this sense of self, this witnessing, noticing, more spiritual sense of self. Here's the easiest one of all, If you're really hooked and struggling at some point, I mean, you're like it's 2 a.m. and you're in a death grip fight over whether or not you're going to go get drunk. I'll just do that as an example. Stay right there in exactly the same place you are, in exactly the same state of mind, and do that little thing where you almost like freeze the moment, like you did with a kid when you went and you played statues. Leave your body, go to the other side of the room, turn back, look at yourself. See if you can find a place of compassion and kindness, and give yourself some advice. I've done that with people in 28-day inpatient programs in Nevada for addiction. And in Nevada, we don't pay for anything. This is cowboy conservative. It's up to you. So if you're in a 28-day program, you have trashed your life. And it's hard as hell to get in. Yeah. And on day 1, I've done this exercise or a version of it. And the most wise words come out of people's mouth. It's not like you don't have wisdom within. It's that you're running on a train that's on tracks. And these habits of mind and habits of use, this addiction, this dictating to, this dictator within, has eliminated your awareness of the possibilities that are right here in the moment, that a simple little perspective taking exercise can remind you of, that you do have choice even inside well-worn ruts. There is a little choice in there. Okay, so all of that showing up, creating a context in which you can learn from your experience, more mindfulness, if you want to use the M word, more situational awareness. If mindfulness is creepy for you, there's religious reasons, other reasons you might not want it. Showing up, let's just say showing up. Now, what do you want to be about in your life? I don't know, you tell me. And here's what we're not talking goals here, we're talking qualities of being and doing, intrinsic to your behavior. Here's the 4 ways I know that are in sweet, sad stories and heroes. Take something you're struggling with, flip it over, and you'll see you're struggling with it because you care about something. Take a vital moment in your life where you felt profoundly connected and uplifted, slow it down, put it in slow motion, you'll find values inside those moments. Take responsibility over the story that you're authoring, not over the details and circumstances, but the theme. You can't do it over details and circumstances. A plane might fly through the window in the next 5 seconds. You don't have any control over that. But you do have control over whether or not you're writing a tragedy or a hero's journey. That's you. Don't be blaming anybody else. I don't care what deck of cards you were dealt. The theme of the story is going to be up to you. So and the last one is heroes. It's the easiest for a quick thing. And by the clock, it says I have 1 more minute to meet my goal. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Pick a hero in your life. Someone you look up to. Ideally, someone who actually knows you or knew you if they've passed. Ideally, but it could be a spiritual guide or somebody that you feel you really know well because you've read so much about what they've done. But it'd be better if it's actually somebody you know, because probably some of our spiritual guides we idealize so much that they're practically perfect in every way. And Mary Poppins is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody that you look up to. Have you got one in your head? So here's what my question is. What did they reveal to you in the way they lived their lives or manifested their life or related to you? What is in there that you look up to as a quality of how they behaved, how they were, how they carried themselves, a quality of being and doing that they manifested? Any quality, and give it a word, give it a name. And I'll pick one. My mama died at 93. Struggled with my alcoholic dad, yeah, but also with her depression and her OCD stuff. Would wash her hands until it bled, etc. I didn't find out till about 5 years ago. Her mother asked her to quit college, come home and take care of her in the TB sanitarium, which back in that day meant 1 hour visits a week. Give up college for that. And she said, "No, Mom, please don't ask me that. I'm in college." I just found out 5 years ago that her mom committed suicide a week later. No freaking wonder she was washing her hands until it bled. Then just add a tiny bit to her story. I'm Jewish by the maternal line, didn't know it till I was 14. I was raised a Roman Catholic. Her mama was Jewish and escaped from Germany just in time. And 5 of her brothers and sisters died in ovens. My grandmother. And her dad had converted. It was an aristocratic German who had converted to marry Mate, my grandmother, and became a Nazi sympathizer and told my mother things like, don't tell anybody that you have tainted blood. You know, and I look at these things like what's going on right now with Hamas and Israel or the Ukraine. My Jewish relatives escaped from Russia to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Romania, from Romania to, oops, this is a mistake, to Germany. And then half of them died there. Yeah. A quarter of my body comes from a Nazi sympathizer. A quarter of my body comes from a person who just barely escaped the Holocaust. Point of my story, and what I'm sort of saying in there, is that I'm slipping off to something a little bit. We've got inside these values, when we look up, we've got tragedies and stories to look at, and we need to own, kind of an interesting metaphor, that we need to own that our own lineage includes murderers and people who've been raped and perpetrators and people who've been treated unfairly. You know, there's 5,000, 10,000, you know, the number of generations behind you that are in your body right now. And now here's your issue with all that. I'm riffing off this because I'm thinking about my mama, and that little part of the story was she had a strength of character that, despite that horrific history, would say things to me like early on when issues of gays and lesbians came up, and I'm old enough to know that you could say a gay joke from morning to night, nobody would even think twice about it. They'd double down on it. And my mother would say, don't judge people, dear. Don't judge people. I would like that in my life. I would like the strength of character to have had your aunts and uncles die in ovens and your father be a Nazi sympathizer, and you're telling your son, don't judge people. That's pretty cool. A person who thought that she caused her mother's death, who washed her hands until it bled, who married an alcoholic, who would threaten her with fists clenched. By the way, a very loving guy, wonderful man. So, sweet, sad stories and heroes. She comes to be my hero. From the outside looking in, you'd probably say, why? You know, because so much of her life looked like a mental health problem. She'd stand in front of the oven and put the thing down, put her butt up so it would warm her butt, you know, and not move for weeks. And I knew that was not normal when I was 8 years old. Something's wrong. Mama's not moving for weeks. Could she get that depressed? But she's my hero nevertheless, because of a quality of being and doing that she somehow or another, through her suffering, put into the world, and by putting it into her behavior and trying to put it in mine. And then that last one is committed action. If you see what you want to put into your life, the only way to do it is one step at a time. So all these processes, and I'm a panic disordered person in recovery, and you know, one of the key things is experience avoidance, you know, open up to your emotions. And I always tell people, don't be thinking I'm the, you know, some golden great example of emotional openness. No, it's the exact opposite. I write about it because I know about it, and I know about it because I'm so bad at it. And the only protection I have when my wife does the call out is, I know, dear, but remember how it used to be. And she always says, it's true, you're better than you used to be. So in my own, as my mother used to say, Yiddish, verstunken away, I think it means stinking, one step at a time. I'm trying to do better at being more emotionally open. It's really hard for me. You know, I was hiding under the bed at 8 years old, listening to my mother and father fight, being afraid I'd see blood on the floor when I came out. So I can have compassion for the part of me that learned to hide. But, you know, I'm 75 freaking years old. Time's up, dude. Take another step. So I'm trying to take another step. Well, you put these processes into your relationships. That means acceptance, being more compassionate, non-judgment, genuine conversations. Really listen to people when they have different opinions than you. Flexible, fluid, voluntary attention. How about joint attention? What are we together as a group, as a community, as a 12-step group, or whatever? What are we focusing on? Spiritual sense of self, attachment and connection, healthy attachment. We as a community, we as a couple, we as a family, we as a nation, we as a world, we as a neighborhood, all those we's. Values, shared values. Commitments, shared commitments, and cooperation. So you can extend these things to your social groups. And by the way, take care of your body, which, by the way, it turns out that if you really want to have your telomeres not get shorter and shorter and shorter, predicting aging, all these processes I just talked about, it's an awesome thing to do. If you really want not to be dumping stress hormones that are needlessly turning excitement into, oh my God, and shutting down your vagal system and ringing alarm bells through almost every cell in your body, you really want to do that? These processes I'm talking about psychologically, especially if linked to behavior that then takes care biologically of good diet, sleep, and exercise, is exactly what your body's yearning for. So it's not hard to extend what I'm talking about to your body. You just treat your body with kindness, treat it like the temple that our religious traditions say that it is. That means don't be putting, liquid poison down, going, woohoo. That also means don't be shaming yourself about that either, right? I mean, then part of your body goes, oh, and your telomeres are being clipped. So that's my talk. I went a little bit more than I thought I would, but not too much. It's my clock says I only added 9 minutes to my hour. And I hope maybe you have a sense just in the talk about how this applies to addiction. I hope you have a little bit of sense, maybe even about why I, as a person with an addiction history all around me, but not kind of in me, stupidly thought it doesn't have to do with addiction, and then went like, oh, yeah, of course it does. And if you're interested in it, you can easily search for the words psychological flexibility. If you want to, you can check out my name. You can even get on my website. I don't spam people, stevenchayes.com. If I ever do, one click, I go away. Or you can go to the World Health Organization and they'll give you, there's a, how bit.ly links work, bit.ly/, type in capital WHO, World Health Organization, an underlined sign, and then ACT for ACT, and it'll take you to the most commonly downloaded document in the entire WHO website, which is an ACT self-help book that you can download for free called Doing What Matters in Times of Stress, that is right now being deployed in the Ukraine and in Israel by WHO. Because as the website says, these processes are helpful for anyone experiencing stress for any reason, regardless of the circumstances. Now, if I said that about my own work, the scientists around me would want to hit me with a stick, but I didn't say that. The World freaking Health Organization said that. So I can just read what's on the website, and so can you. Just follow that bit.ly link. My point being, there's lots of free resources. And there's one that I really like called Act for the Public in groups.io, which has been going now for 15 years. A really sweet group, about 2,000 people who in their own verstunken way are just learning to apply psychological flexibility processes to the stuff that ails them. Everything you can imagine. And there's just a lot of wisdom on that list and a lot of humanity and compassion. So that way or some other way, if something I've said is of interest to you, yeah, there's books. I mentioned one, my students now retired, Kelly Wilson's book of wisdom to know the difference. But look around and you'll see it.
Dr. Hayes, with great honor and respect for you and your work, and much, much gratitude for everything that you have given to us over the course of your career and continue to give to us. Thank you so much. So would you like to take us out with a final thought?
I've never been asked to do that, but it's a delightful request, and let me do that. So let me just ask you to get in touch with this deeper, more spiritual part of you. And however you think about that as part of a larger spiritual world, as connected in some deep way to God, or however you speak about those kinds of issues, just take a little moment to catch that you're here aware, and that it isn't just your physical form and problems and struggles and thoughts, but there's a deeper part of you that's listening to me now. And from that perspective or point of view, with the next breath, just looking at this screen that you're looking at, or being aware of the journey we've just been on, as you breathe in, see if you can take in and accept, in the way that I've meant it before, receive the gift that's offered, that you're here with other human beings who hurt at times, who suffer at times, and who have problems. You're not alone. You're not the only one. Don't do it to eliminate or get rid of your own suffering. Do it to take in the human condition. You're here with human beings, and with this breath in, this next breath, you're taking on purpose, some of their pain and suffering. And with the next breath out, that you're intending to support them in the journey in which those breaths in for them can be empowering, can really bring them the kind of oxygen and what they need as a psychological and physical being, as a social being. So breathe in, taking in that pain, and breathe out that intention of, in all humility, learning how to be better at living a life worth living. And if I could ask you to do it, it's not just the folks here who've been in this marvelous 2 hours. With the next breath, allow yourself to remember that there's people who are fighting and dying and suffering right now. There on our TV screens in the Ukraine or in Israel, but maybe not so much on the Ukraine, on our screens everywhere, all around the world. And allow that same thing as this next breath. Part of the human condition is we are the ones for whom, even if we have everything, it can be very hard. And with the next breath out, to see if you can connect with an intention somehow in your life in some tiny, tiny way, like a molecule in the ocean, allowing a wave to move through it, that you can be part of something that may uplift suffering humanity, that your journey is bigger than just you. It's about something. And maybe there's something to learn in this journey that you're on, in your 12-step program and in your addiction, that is worth your life's moments. And with that, I'll say adieu to you. And somebody cruelly said, go Hawaii. That's the wrong thing to write. Go pack. And peace, love, and life, my friends.